Real quickly before we begin, I want to thank this video's sponsor, carmarshal.com. Carmarshal.com can save you lots of money on buying used or new vehicles, cars, trucks, school buses. If you want to save money, I'll have a link in the description down below. I know I'm going to
Pregnant mom thrown in prison for legally defending her family with a gun. NRA silent. A pregnant mother is in prison after she stood her ground and used her legal gun to defend her family, and the NRA's support is nowhere to be found. By Rachel Blevins, May 6, 2018. As the National Rifle Association holds its annual conference in Texas, a mother is sitting in prison in Michigan, where she will soon give birth to her second child, as she spends the next 2 years serving the mandatory sentence for felonious assault and a felony firearms conviction. But Sawatu Salama R.A., 26, was a legal gun owner with a concealed carry permit in a state that allows open carry, and when she pulled out her gun, she was defending herself, her mother and her 2-year-old daughter. The incident occurred in July 2017 at Ra's mother's house when there was a conflict between Ra's niece and a friend. R.A. ordered the friend to leave the property, and when the friend's mother, Chanel Harvey, drove to the house to pick up her daughter, a verbal conflict with R.A. ensued. Ra's legal team told the Metro Times that Harvey attempted to run over Ra's mother and started ramming her vehicle into Ra's car, while Ra's 2-year-old daughter played inside. R.A. responded by reaching into her glove box and pulling out her legally registered handgun, which was unloaded. While Ra's decision to point the gun in Harvey's direction stopped any further aggression and resulted in Harvey finally leaving the property, but she did so after pulling out her phone and taking pictures of R.A. holding the gun, raising questions about whether she was actually concerned that R.A. was going to use it to shoot her. Harvey went straight to the police and claimed that she was the victim, and R.A. was the aggressor who confronted her with a gun in her hand when she attempted to pick up her daughter. R.A. also went to the police on the same day and filed a report claiming that she was attacked by Harvey and she pulled out her gun to defend herself and her family. Given the fact that R.A. was a legal gun owner with a concealed carry permit, it would be assumed by many that the law would act in her favor, especially since Michigan has a stand your ground law, which states: 1. An individual who has not or is not engaged in the commission of a crime at the time he or she uses deadly force may use deadly force against another individual anywhere he or she has the legal right to be, with no duty to retreat if either of the following applies. A. The individual honestly and reasonably believes that the use of deadly force is necessary to prevent the imminent death of or imminent great bodily harm to himself or herself or to another individual. B. The individual honestly and reasonably believes that the use of deadly force is necessary to prevent the imminent sexual assault of himself or herself or of another individual. However, 3 weeks later, a SWAT team broke down the front door and raided Ra's house, and she quickly learned that law enforcement had already chosen a side in the case. Her lawyers told the Metro Times that a detective from the Detroit Police Department testified in court that the department considers the person who arrives at the police station first to be the victim, which automatically made R.A. the aggressor, even though she arrived hours later to file her own report. When the case went to trial, the court had little mercy on R.A., and her attorney, Victoria Burton Harris, told Vox that she believes the jury was not fully informed on the facts of the case, which were not accurately collected by detectives who sided with Harvey, and they were not aware that a conviction carried a mandatory sentence. This case was simple: a black woman, a mother, a daughter, an activist was afraid, and it didn't matter. Her fear wasn't significant enough for a jury of her peers to believe it. We'll never know what more she needed to endure to justify her fear. She stood her ground and is now serving a mandatory 2-year prison term. It's a hard pill to swallow, Burton Harris said. As the Metro Times reported, before R.A. was labeled as a convicted felon, she was an outspoken activist in Detroit who educated young mothers on nutrition, and she served as the co-director of the Cass Corridor's East Michigan Environmental Action Council. The executive director of the Sierra Club, Michael Brune, released a statement last month, condemning Ra's sentence and the inhumane treatment she was receiving as a pregnant mother in prison. COPWATCH Salama RA is a powerful and inspiring leader in the Michigan environmental justice community, and a member of the Sierra Club family who has been unjustly incarcerated for defending herself and her family as should be permitted by law. COPWATCH has spent her life fighting environmental injustice and pushing back against the big polluters who are violating the law to poison her community. She does this difficult work against the backdrop of a legal system and society that disproportionately oppress people of color, particularly black women, at every turn. In this case, it does not appear that she is being afforded the protection of the law she deserves, as is all too often the case for women of color dealing with our criminal justice system. Black women are incarcerated at a rate 4 times higher than white women, and COPWATCH's case is a tragic example of this injustice. While the NRA proudly touts the increasing number of women and mothers who are carrying concealed firearms and actively working to protect their families, it has stayed eerily silent when it comes to Ra's case. This has left many to question if it is because RA is black, given the fact that the NRA has failed to speak out when black gun owners are targeted or killed by police, even when they are following the law. If the NRA actually cared about the Second Amendment and American civil liberties instead of just how much money can be raised and how much public support can be garnered from powerful politicians, then it would be adamantly speaking out about the unjust arrest, conviction, and overall treatment of COPWATCH Salama RA, a mother who was wronged by a corrupt justice system and now will never be allowed to legally protect her family with a firearm again.
You're listening to Michigan Radio. A young, pregnant environmental activist is serving a 2-year sentence in a Michigan prison. But COPWATCH Salama Ra says she acted in self-defense when she pulled a gun on a neighbor last summer. Michigan Radio's Sarah Swick tells us her story and what it could tell us about cases where black gun owners claim self-defense.
COPWATCH Salama Ra was born into what her mother, Rhonda Anderson, calls Detroit's African-centered activist culture community.
COPWATCH's name means born during war to bring in peace, sent by God.
Anderson is a prominent activist in that community, and as she grew up, Ra became one too. She became passionate about environmental justice, fighting for people burdened by the toxic contaminants and other environmental burdens that haunt poor industrial cities like Detroit. As Ra blossomed into a young activist in her own right, Anderson says her work took her far beyond the city.
She's been to Turkey. She's been to Paris. She's been to Senegal.
But Anderson is a strong believer that the many stresses of life in Detroit create other kinds of toxic situations. And one arose last July in front of her home on the city's west side.
This incident really was a result of an altercation that 2 children had had.
That's Victoria Burton Harris. She's Ra's attorney. The 2 children are Ra's teenage niece and the daughter of a neighbor. They were friends, but they had a fight at school. The 2 girls made up, but tensions lingered between their families. That's important because of what happened next. On July 16th, the neighbor girl showed up at Anderson's house. Ra was there. She told the girl to leave. Burton Harris says the girl called her mother, crying, to come back and pick her up.
And she was irate when she pulled up.
From there, the stories diverge. Here's the neighbor's story. Ra approached her car angry and told her to leave. She says Ra got a gun and pointed it at her and her daughter. The neighbor says she accidentally hit Ra's car as she tried to pull away, but she stopped to snap cell phone pictures of Ra holding her gun. That's one version of events. Ra tells a different story. She says the neighbor returned in a rage and started using her car as a weapon. She rammed Ra's parked car with Ra's 2-year-old daughter inside. Her mom, Rhonda Anderson, came into the street to intervene. This is Ra speaking in a video supporters recently made about her case.
So she's literally going back and forth with this car, putting in reverse and fixing herself to come at us again. My mother, who was also standing very close to me, wasn't able to run.
Ra says that's when she pulled her gun out. It was unloaded and licensed. She pointed it at the neighbor and her daughter in their car.
I was afraid, and I told her, you have to leave now.
That question of fear, of what fear looks like, when it's justified, and who decides that, is at the heart of this case. It's also at the heart of Michigan's self-defense law. Stephen Doolin is with the Michigan Coalition of Responsible Gun Owners and an adjunct professor at Cooley Law School. Doolin says pulling a gun is always considered deadly force. The person using deadly force has no duty to retreat from a threatening situation. But
deadly force is appropriate self-defense only when preventing death, great bodily harm, or rape, imminent death, great bodily harm, or rape.
It's a two-pronged legal test. There must be an actual imminent threat, and your use of deadly force must be reasonable.
So you have to actually believe it, and basically the jury has to agree that your fear was reasonable under the circumstances.
Ra didn't have to take her case to a jury. Her first lawyer encouraged her to take a plea deal. But Ra didn't want that. Again, her trial attorney, Victoria Burton Harris.
COPWATCH rejected that advice and said, I would rather fight this. I am not who they are painting me as. I acted in self-defense. I'd like to present my case to a jury.
All the jury had to go on were these dueling stories and the 3 cell phone pictures the neighbor took of Ra pointing her gun. Burton Harris, as the prosecutor, made a big deal out of those pictures. He said Ra didn't look scared in them. Burton Harris questions that perception.
Fear looks different on some people versus others. And that was a part of what the jury had to analyze and determine.
The jury apparently agreed with the prosecution. It found Ra guilty of felonious assault against the neighbor. Jurors also found Ra guilty on an added felony firearms charge, and that's a mandatory 2-year sentence under Michigan law. Ra thinks the jury saw her as angry rather than scared, and she thinks that's at least partly because of her race.
The way the world views what black fear looks like. If I was somebody else, maybe, just maybe, they would have identified with when I said I was afraid.
Steve Doolin of Cooley Law School says it's hard to know for sure whether black defendants who invoke self-defense are convicted more often than white defendants in similar cases.
I honestly don't think we have enough data on that. I think it's a legitimate concern, and I think more data needs to be gathered.
But Ra's mom, Rhonda Anderson, is also convinced that stereotypes, particularly ideas of black women as innately angry, helped convict her daughter.
I know she was innocent, that she was doing exactly as she said. She was protecting me, herself, and her daughter from a person that was enraged.
Ra now sits in prison, 7 months pregnant. She had serious complications with her first pregnancy, and her current one is considered high risk. Ra's legal team plans to appeal her conviction, but first they're trying to secure an appeals bond. That would allow Ra to go free while the case is on appeal and not have to deliver her baby behind bars. I'm Sarah Swick, Michigan Radio News.
Hey, Sheriff, we have a question about why your office, your intelligence division, is investigating private citizens for criminal investigation that happen to be activists that are overseeing your department. Why would you have your intelligence division investigate private citizens? We have done... Sir, we don't hate anyone. We love freedom and we love American people. And government is out of control. That's why you're seeing such a revolt nationwide. Why can't you just answer, why is Susan Edwards, your intelligence division, investigating private citizens? This should not happen.
Are you here to apply for a job?
Possibly I might be applying for a job, but that's irrelevant to my question. Why would you ask that question?
Well, enjoy the fair.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Excuse you?
Excuse me, sir.
So those of you that haven't been
Wow.
on a bike before, we're
Sheriff's
just
getting a little too pushy. You work for us, Sheriff. Just keep that in mind. At one time we respected you, but not with that type of attitude.